The guilt wasn't always an alarm that I was out of my integrity. It was an alarm that my old integrity needed to evolve. It needed to be okay for me to protect myself, to take care of myself and honor myself. And by my new standards, that wasn't doing something bad at all. It was finally doing something right. And little by little, I started to reclaim my peace. A pause instead of a people-pleasing yes. A breath before over-explaining. A small sacred no to what didn't feel good in my body. And over time, peace became the highest currency in my life. Not performance, not perfection, not connection, not being liked, needed, or approved of. Peace. Because peace is what lets me hear myself. Welcome to Grow with Robin Breckenridge, a podcast about stepping into the most fully expressed, aligned, and conscious version of yourself. Here, we dive into the real work of personal growth, establishing boundaries, understanding your patterns, building self-trust, healing emotional wounds, and creating relationships that feel safe, authentic, and fulfilling. I'm Robin, a life and relationship coach, and in each episode, we'll explore the tools, insights, and conversations that will help you not just improve your life and relationships, but truly transform them. You don't have to just go through it. Let's grow through it, and let's do it together. Hi, and welcome back to Grow with Robin Breckenridge. Today's episode is deeply personal and deeply transformative because we're talking about something that's completely changed my life: boundaries. And I just want to say that if you are here listening today, you are supposed to be. You are being called. Maybe the calling is to get a refresh on the boundaries that you already have, or if you've already done this work with me. Maybe the calling is that you are about to enter the most transformative experience of your internal life, which is creating a new system of boundaries in your life. I don't even know how many episodes I'm going to do on this topic, but it's my show, so I get to do as many as I want. But the goal here is that I'm going to do enough so that you feel confident enough to start to put this into action in your life, or that you're curious enough to maybe hire a professional and dig into this work a little bit more, because sometimes this work, we need help. Like, I don't want you to think you have to do this all on your own. I certainly didn't. But I'm not going to talk about surface level boundaries today. Not the no is a complete sentence kind. Not the perfectly curated Instagram quote kind. I mean the real ones. The ones that honor your nervous system. The ones that help you stop abandoning yourself. The ones that create emotional safety and ultimately bring you back home to your relationship with yourself. But before we dive into the tools and teaching, I wanted to share a little bit of my story, because maybe, like me, you've spent a lot of your life trying to be the nice one. I was a yes person. I said yes when I was tired. I said yes when I didn't have the capacity. I said yes when I wanted to say no, but didn't want to disappoint anyone. I said yes even when people treated me poorly, because unconsciously I didn't really believe that I was allowed to have standards. I became a lot of people's go-to person, the helper, the fixer. And definitely at that time, I wasn't getting paid for it. And I was the one who would always show up, even when those people didn't show up for me. And I was convinced that that was love, that was loyalty. But I also thought it meant I was being like a good person or a good friend. But the truth, I didn't even know what an authentic yes felt like, because again, unconsciously, I didn't really know that I was allowed to say no. Like, of course, from a logical perspective, I did. But there was a part of me that there was just too much risk involved in saying no, because my fear was that it would cost me the connection. And so that was too scary. I didn't know how to manage that. So guilt became my compass in relationships. It told me where to go, what to give, and how much of myself to abandon. Until one day, something in me just started to break. I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I was resentful, but too afraid of conflict to speak up for myself. I felt invisible, even while I was overperforming and overfunctioning in so many roles in my life. And I eventually realized there was no space for me in my life. And that was a big wake-up call. And learning boundaries changed everything for me. Not because I got perfect at them. Like, I'm very honest. I didn't become an expert at teaching boundaries because I was exceptionally good at them. I became really good at teaching boundaries because they were exceptionally challenging for me. And even to this day, they can be challenging for me. I'm so much better at them. But there's still moments that they're hard. There's still moments that they feel dysregulating. But the most important part was I finally stopped abandoning myself to the degree that I was before. And my guilt did not disappear overnight. In fact, I teach this to all my clients. Like, this is the concept of first and second voice. My guilt still speaks first. It still says, oh, it's only 30 minutes of your time, or, oh, you can sleep when you're dead, you know? And then this second voice emerged. But the part that came up to kind of bring that second voice up was I had to get curious with the first voice. So you'll hear me say it a million times on this show, but I believe that pausing is the biggest and best mental health intervention of all time. Because if we don't pause, then that voice just sounds like truth. So now I'm able to get curious with that first voice and apply all these tools that I'm going to teach you guys. Then the second voice becomes the more trustworthy voice, the more directional voice, because it has more self-compassion. It has more resources. It cares about my well-being. So the first voice, though, that guilt voice, it still speaks for me. I just get curious with it now. So the guilt really wasn't proof that I did something wrong or bad all the time. It actually was just bringing up the discomfort of doing something differently, because it didn't mean I was doing something bad. The truth was that I had been living by other people's standards for so long of what they thought was good and bad in the way that I showed up. So I had to bring those standards back home to myself. The guilt wasn't always an alarm that I was out of my integrity. It was an alarm that my old integrity needed to evolve. It needed to be okay for me to protect myself, to take care of myself and honor myself. And by my new standards, that wasn't doing something bad at all. It was finally doing something right. And little by little, I started to reclaim my peace. A pause instead of a people-pleasing yes. A breath before over-explaining. A small, sacred no to what didn't feel good in my body. And over time, peace became the highest currency in my life. Not performance, not perfection, not connection, not being liked, needed, or approved of. Peace. Because peace is what lets me hear myself. It's what tells me the truth. It's what reminds me I'm safe to honor what's real, even if it's inconvenient for me or others or unfamiliar. And that's what I come back to now. Not the old rules, but the quiet knowing that peace is my proof. So I stopped over-explaining. I stopped overextending. By the way, I don't mean 100% of the time. There's still times in my life where I catch myself doing these things, but I'm a lot better at it. And I stopped attracting people who were comfortable taking more than I had to give. I learned that boundaries aren't about rejection. They're about protection. They're about clarity. They're about connection that honors you too. So I'm going to repeat that. They're about connection that honors you too. I stopped shrinking to to keep myself in relationships. I stopped staying quiet so other people could stay comfortable. And I started building a life that actually included me and my well-being. So if you are someone who feels like you're constantly overgiving, overfunctioning, or overexplaining just to keep people close, this episode is definitely for you. We're going to talk about today what boundaries actually are and what they're not, signs of unhealthy boundaries in your life. So not that we judge it, but that we can get curious, because awareness is the first step in change. The emotions that we need to learn to manage to be able to set healthy boundaries in our life. So that's like what kind of takes us off of the surface level, because no is a complete sentence. However, if you don't know how to manage the fear, the guilt, the shame, the anger that comes up when you're setting boundaries, you're not going to do it. And that no is a complete sentence kind of sets us up for failure. And we're also going to talk about the benefits of setting healthy boundaries in your life. So remember, this episode is not about perfection. It's about alignment. It's about permission. And it's about learning to build a life that includes your voice, your truth, and your needs. So let's start with this. Boundaries are not about controlling other people. There is a truth in this life. I don't even like it, but it's true. We are powerless over other people's behavior, actions, and choices. So we're not controlling people with boundaries. They're about being clear with yourself. A boundary is not a punishment. It's not an ultimatum, and it's not rejection. It's simply a framework that protects your peace and helps you engage with others from a place of truth. So what are boundaries? I think the most simplified kind of formula for what boundaries are is if you do blank, I will do blank. So boundaries are clear, actionable self-agreements. Like all of the boundaries that I teach are an internal system. Sometimes we need to be invitational about them. Sometimes we need to communicate them. Sometimes we don't. But boundaries are always a conversation and an agreement with ourselves first. So they sound like if you yell again, I'm going to end the conversation. Not, you can't talk to me like that. I read this article, or my life coach, Robin, told me that that's unacceptable. That's about controlling behavior. Again, it is about holding and honoring an agreement with yourself that if this thing happens, I will protect myself. If you yell again, I'm going to end the conversation. They're not threats. They're just self-honoring choices. Now, of course, here's another part of them, because definitely when I first learned boundaries, I guess I didn't understand the not control part of it. I thought it meant that I go in someone's face and say, you can't do that to me, but never leave and never really back it up. So this is a really important part about boundary setting and what boundaries are. Boundaries are backed by energy and action. Boundaries are not just something you say. They're something that you embody. Your follow through matters way more than your words. And I will tell you this because I've seen so many people do it, and I've done it in my own life. Energy doesn't lie ever. When we back our boundaries with energy and action, when we're really like, I am done with this shit, somehow the other person knows it. I have had people come to me with like habitual boundary pushers in their life. And because they back it with energy and action, those people really start to get like, oh, I can't do this with this person anymore. Oh, I can't behave this way. And so many people will come to me and say like, I need boundaries. I need my family to change or whatever. I will tell you that the most impactful thing that you can do to ever create change in your life is to just have boundaries in your life, to just have limits. It tends to be way more of a teacher than anything that our mouth could say. So your follow through matters more than your words. Boundaries are also borders. They define where you end and someone else begins. They help you know what's yours and what's not yours. Because when we don't have proper borders, how somebody else feels becomes how we feel. If somebody else is angry, gosh, if I had $1 for every time somebody came back into a session and said, oh man, it was the wrong boundary. The boundary you set was the wrong one. My mom is so mad at me now. It doesn't mean that it's the wrong boundary. It just means that that person is protesting the boundary. And if you are not connected to their feelings and they cannot be okay and they can be disappointed and they can have a process around you taking care of yourself, then you're free to set them. But if your mom's anger and disappointment is yours, then we're going to feel like we did something bad. Boundaries are also limits. Boundaries help you honor your emotional, physical, mental, spiritual capacity. We have to have limits with everything in our life because you can't bargain with your bandwidth. And we all have a bandwidth. We all have an energetic bandwidth. We all have a tolerance bandwidth. So it's not anyone else's job to know what our limits are. It's our job to own our limits and be able to communicate that to the people around us, or even more importantly, ourselves. And then this is probably one of my favorite things about boundaries is that boundaries have a lot to do with access. Boundaries allow you to adjust the access that people have to you in your life. Not everyone deserves the same level of access to you or your vulnerability or your feelings. Boundaries let you protect your time, your heart, and your energy based off of someone's emotional safety and consistency. Here's another misconception. A lot of times people will come in and say, well, this person's having a boundary. And I'll go, ooh, that's not a boundary. That's a wall. Boundaries are not walls. When we don't have the luxury of having boundaries growing up, walls are like a really great replacement because walls work. They keep people out. The reason why walls are not a sustainable approach to protecting yourself is because you end up being the only person behind the wall, which means that you're isolated. You're alone again. That's why they don't work. So boundaries to me are bridges, not walls. Healthy boundaries allow for sustainable connection. They say, this is how I can show up and stay true to myself. So the bridge part of boundaries is that boundaries allow us to both connect and protect ourselves within a relationship. Attachment wounding means that we prioritize either one of those when connection is compromised. Either we prioritize connection over protecting ourselves, and I'm sure some of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, or we prioritize protecting ourselves over the connection. Neither one of those, like both of those, interrupt us being able to feel safe in connection with people. So boundaries allow us to do both. They allow us to both show up for the connection in a way that feels safe for us and protect ourselves. There also, this comes from Terry Cole, who's like an amazing, she has a boundary boss book and she's a therapist, but they're your own personal rules of engagement. They're your standards. They're your sacred agreements with yourself. A boundary says, this is how I move through the world and how I invite others to be in relationship with me. So here's what boundaries are not. Boundaries are not controlling. Boundaries aren't about changing others. They're about honoring your response if they don't. They're not ultimatums. That's another one. If I had $1 for every time someone comes in and says, but wait, is this an ultimatum? What's the difference between a boundary and an ultimatum? Ultimatums come from fear. Ultimatums are a part of us that's trying to adjust the way we show up to control an outcome. If that truth that I talked about earlier is true, which gosh, I just have so much evidence it's true. We can't control anyone. We can't change anyone. So ultimatums come from fear. Boundaries come from love. Either we are loving ourselves enough to honor ourselves, or we're loving that person we're in relationship with enough to tell them the truth. So boundaries come from clarity. They're not punishment. You are not withdrawing love. You're choosing self-respect and honoring what's safe for you. They're not rejection. Saying no doesn't mean you don't care. It means that you're committed to honoring yourself. And they're not about how much you love someone. This one gets in the way a lot when setting boundaries in your life. You can love someone deeply and you will love someone deeply and still need to have boundaries, still need to take care of yourself, still need to honor your emotional safety. In fact, real love includes boundaries. Boundaries are not mean. Boundaries are an act of kindness to yourself and others because clarity is kind. Now, where boundaries get a bad rap is how we deliver them. I'm going to do a lot of episodes on boundaries, so I'm going to kind of stick to my program today. But anger is a necessary step in setting boundaries. Anger is an alarm from your nervous system that you need some kind of protection. It really comes from like the reptilian brainstem, like part of us that just is there to keep us alive. That if a threat was to come into our den back in the day, we would go, rah, get out. This is mine. I have to protect myself in my space. So they're all about protection. We're just talking about emotional protection. So I teach everybody this. Anger is an alert that from your nervous system that you need a boundary, but it is not an invitation to communicate the boundary from anger. That's where boundaries get a bad rap. So for instance, if I was to say, hey, maybe someone's calling me at night at a time that just doesn't work for me and feels kind of dishonoring and not aligned. I could be like, can you please stop calling me after 9:00? Like I have things to do. Okay. That energy is angry and nobody wants to help that energy. They want to defend themselves against that energy. But if I was to say to someone, same boundary infraction, hey, I work a lot during the day and I really honor my sacred time for myself. I'm not going to be able to talk to you during the week after a certain time period, but here's a better time that I could connect with you. Or if you could call me during the weekend, that would be a lot better. People are so much more willing to be like, oh my gosh, of course. Like, I don't want to bother you. And now, of course, not everyone will do that. Sometimes people are just boundary pushers, but you can see the difference in the energy. So if we're communicating them full of anger and rage, they're probably going to come out pretty mean, maybe judgmental, maybe rejecting, maybe abandoning. But the boundaries I'm talking about that are fueled by love and self-love, if we can just breathe and let us know that the anger is there to communicate a need, that we need a boundary, and we take a breath and we pause before we communicate them, then boundaries are definitely not mean. They are kind. So now that we've talked about what boundaries are and what they're not, let's get really honest about the signs that your boundaries might need some love and attention. Because sometimes the biggest red flags isn't how others treat us. It's how we abandon ourselves in the process of trying to be liked, accepted, or needed. So here's a few subtle and definitely not so subtle signs that your boundaries might need some strengthening. 1, over-disclosing. You find yourself sharing too much too soon, especially with people who haven't earned that level of emotional intimacy. This can come from a desire to feel seen or connected. Sometimes it's a response to feeling uncomfortable with people, but it often leaves you feeling exposed or even dismissed. I call that like the vulnerability hangover. Like it's the time that like we leave that interaction with that person and we go, why did I say that? Or why did I tell them that much? 2, overcommitting. You say yes when you want to say no, or maybe you say yes because you don't even know what's a yes, an authentic yes or an authentic no. You take on too much. You constantly stretch yourself thin in the name of being helpful, reliable, or nice. But deep down, you feel exhausted, overwhelmed, and maybe even a little resentful. 3, trying to control others. You might not think of this as a boundary issue, but it definitely is. Trying to manage other people's reactions, emotions, or decisions is often a sign that you don't feel safe unless they behave a certain way. And this is where the concept of codependency and boundary collapsing can sneak in. We're all of us very well-intended people, have tried to change someone in our life. And usually that goes all the way back to an original wound, because when we're kids, we truly are reliant on our parents for survival. And so at that stage of our life, we actually do need our parents to be different or to have skill sets that they don't have so that we can be okay. But I want you guys to hear this. We're not in the same environments we were when we were kids. And we don't need anyone to be different than they are. Now, it complicates a lot of things and it can bring up a lot of grief and overwhelm that like, crap, I'm going to have to leave this relationship or this job. But first, today, we're going to stay in this moment. I want you to just start getting curious about what I'm saying. So if it's true that you might be controlling someone, or maybe on the flip, you are feeling controlled in a relationship, I want you to know that that is boundaryless. Number 4, being emotionally manipulated. If you feel like guilt, fear, or obligation are being used against you, someone questions your decision, plays the victim, or makes you feel selfish for having needs. Like just the other day, I was talking to a client and she said that she asserted a boundary and the person in her life said, I know this is your therapist talking, or this is like, like this person is against them. And it's like, it's always about you. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Or she was just trying to take care of herself and honor the relationship by communicating her limits. So you're not selfish for having needs. You're human. Now, it might inconvenience other people, but that's their side of the street. So when boundaries are weak, we're more likely to tolerate this type of behavior and doubt ourselves because of it. Number 5, enmeshment. It becomes hard to tell where you end and another person begins. That's what I was saying earlier. Enmeshment is very hard for me to like verbalize. I always use an example. And if you're not watching, you're listening, you're not going to see this, but I always put my hands like together and intertwine my fingers. That's what enmeshment is. It means that there is no divide and no boundary between you and the other person, their emotions and your emotions, their reaction and your reaction. Their pain is your pain. Their mood becomes your responsibility. You lose sight of your own needs because theirs always comes first. Number 6, codependency. Big concept. This would be that your identity or worth feels tied to fixing, saving, or being needed. You overfunction so that other people can underfunction. And even if you feel resentful, you keep showing up hoping that it will earn you love. That's one form of codependency. Just so you know, codependency, just like everything, is a spectrum. My 2 favorite definitions, and I might have said this in other episodes, but I'm going to keep saying the same things that I think are relevant because repetition doesn't hurt anybody in learning about yourself. But my 2 favorite definitions for codependency is if you're okay, I'm okay. And that codependency is chronic self-neglect. It's where we prioritize the needs, the behaviors, the problems of other people over our well-being. And when people say, well, what's the difference between codependency and love? Because codependency and love can feel like the same. Codependency has love in it a lot of times. In fact, maybe every time. The discerning difference between the two is that codependency requires you to abandon yourself. That's a really good one. And goodness gracious, could I do a whole series of episodes just on that? And I probably will, so hang tight. Number 7, avoiding conflict at all costs. When you don't speak up, even when something hurts, you go along to get along. And while everything looks fine on the outside, inside you feel invisible and disconnected. And there's a great saying, I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's like when we hide our feelings to keep the peace, we start a war with ourselves. And that war is usually internal. And sometimes we've been at war internally in ourselves for so long, we don't even know what's happening. But those are the survival strategies that worked at one point. And gosh, we can be so thankful for them. But again, now they cost us the connection with ourselves. Like initially, hiding your feelings and avoiding conflict is going to get you out of the fear of conflict initially, but the conflict doesn't go away. Your needs don't go away. Number 8 would be feeling responsible for other people's emotions or feeling responsible to manage their emotions. So that means you take ownership of how others feel, constantly walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace. You overthink your words, you fear being misunderstood, and you twist yourself into knots to avoid upsetting anyone. And one of the most beautiful things that we can do is get out of the way and allow consequences to come to people. Because consequences, in my opinion, are the universe's way of teaching us. There is a lesson in every consequence that comes our way. When we stand in the way of people getting their consequences, we're standing in the way of them learning. And ultimately, that's enabling. That's not helping someone. Setting boundaries isn't just about the words. It's about what you feel when you say them and how you choose to respond to those feelings. Let's be honest, boundary work will stir up emotions, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something different. You're rewriting a script you didn't create, and that takes courage. So let's walk through some of the most common emotions that surface in boundary work and what they're really trying to tell you. Because feelings are just a communication system from your nervous system that's letting you know that there's a need. So what are they trying to tell you? Guilt. This one comes up all the time in boundary setting. Guilt really means I did something bad. That heavy, nagging feeling that whispers, you're being selfish. You're letting them down. You should have said yes. But guilt isn't always a moral compass. It's often just the voice of your conditioning. It's the echo of a younger version of you who survived by people pleasing, being agreeable, and self-sacrificing. Guilt is not a stop sign. It's a growing pain. It doesn't mean you're doing something bad all the time. It means you're doing something new. So here's a quick reframe on guilt, because I'm definitely going to do some episodes about managing guilt. Guilt means I did something bad. Bad, not my favorite word, so I like to relanguage it or understand that it means I'm doing something out of my integrity. A great question to ask yourself when guilt comes up is what I'm doing bad or out of my integrity? By my standards. That's the most important part of that question. So let's say I decide that I don't want to go to this thing I got invited to this weekend because I really need to relax and recharge and connect with myself. Then I go, oh gosh, maybe I should go. It's kind of not nice. I don't want that person to be mad at me. And I go, oh, that doesn't feel good. I feel guilt. There's me getting curious with that first voice. And then I go, okay, well, what am I doing? I'm not going. Well, what's deeper than that? I'm taking care of myself. I'm honoring myself. And then I go, okay, well, is honoring myself bad by my standard or out of my integrity by my standard? Hell no, it's not based off the standards I have now. So then I can go, oh, thanks, guilt. Thanks for checking in. No, I'm not doing anything bad by my standards. I'm not doing anything out of my integrity. Now, there are sometimes, this is why guilt can be used when we're getting curious with it to like be a mirror for ourselves. There are some times where I'm like, ooh, like that kind of felt harsh what I said. Like I'm starting to feel kind of guilty about it or whatever. And then I go, well, was that out of my integrity? And there are some times I go, yeah, it was. Or yeah, it kind of was bad by my standards. That wasn't the best version of me that came out. And then instead of kicking around in the guilt, because guilt is a very low vibrational energy, I can learn from it. So I can change that behavior going forward, and I can always clean it up with whoever it impacted. So guilt is something we need to get curious with. And then as an addition, like we need to really start kind of redefining and owning what our standards are. Because I've definitely implemented boundaries in my life that were bad by someone else's standards. Maybe they thought I should go. Maybe they thought it was rude that I didn't or whatever. But I now evaluate that off of my own standards. Shame. Shame means I am bad. Shame says, who do you think you are to have needs or ask for what you need or protect yourself? It makes you feel like protecting your peace is wrong, that saying no is unkind, that honoring yourself makes you unlovable. Shame doesn't want you to take up space. It wants you to stay small so that you stay, quote unquote, safe. But boundaries are how you reappear. They are how you choose visibility, truth, and self-respect. So remember, there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is more focused on your action. Shame is more focused on who you are and your worth. And if we are having a problem owning our worth, we will have a problem setting boundaries. Again, there's a lot that I can dig into. So we will talk about management of feelings in future episodes. But for right now, I want you to know that these are the feelings that we need to learn how to manage or be able to recognize when we are attempting to set boundaries. Fear is another one that comes up all the time. Fear says, if you say no, they'll leave. If you set a boundary, they'll get mad. If you change, they won't love you anymore. But pause and ask yourself, is the fear really about losing someone else or finally choosing you and stepping into a deeper capacity of your own power? Fear is normal, but it doesn't have to be the driver. Awkwardness. Boundaries can feel awkward. In fact, it's one of the things that I teach my clients, like we have to prepare for, because if you were someone who over disclosed and now we go back to a relationship and we say a lot less, it can be awkward. If we communicate a boundary, it can be awkward. And this is especially true because most of us have never learned how to manage awkwardness. It's something that we just self-abandon in. I'm speaking from personal experience as I say this, because it was one of the major feelings that I had to learn how to manage, because my go-to when I felt awkward or I sensed that someone else felt awkward was to abandon myself and start tap dancing and do the dog and pony show and then walk out of that interaction with a vulnerability hangover. Awkwardness doesn't mean something's wrong. It just means it's new. Like learning any new skill, discomfort is a part of the process. It does not mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're growing. Grief. This is the good and the bad news. Again, I always shoot it straight when it comes to this work. Boundary work is grief work. Like anytime I take people through my boundary system, there's usually some sort of disappointment. Like, man, I wish I was closer to this person, or they were safer, or things could be different. Or maybe there's things that you have to let go in your process of evolving, like a job or a career or a person or a relationship. So grief arises when you realize certain dynamics won't survive your growth. When you see that some relationships were only sustainable when you kept abandoning yourself. You might grieve the version of you who tolerated too much. You might grieve the people you thought could love you the way that you needed to be loved, but didn't. Grief is sacred. And grief is, in my opinion, the emotion that we actually experience the most of in this life. But for whatever reason, our society kind of only talks about it when it has to do with the death of a person. But grief really means I lost something that was important to me. And loss could be they physically left your life. It could mean that they don't leave, but something changes or shifts. It could even be like, I always order this food and they discontinued it. I mean, from like a spectrum of grief, we're constantly having to adjust, and disappointment is within the family of grief. So grief is sacred. It's a muscle that we're going to have to develop because we're going to experience it over and over again. And when I'm teaching you guys these things about boundaries, especially when we get to the episode where I teach you the boundary pyramid, it has a way of putting your relationships into a place of reality very quickly. And that can absolutely bring about grief. So I would be setting you guys up to fail if I did not talk about boundary work being grief work. Anxiety, that racing heart, the tight chest, the feeling like you want to crawl out of your skin, the flood of what ifs before you speak your truth. Anxiety is your nervous system bracing itself for the original wound, rejection, conflict, abandonment, judgment. But the more you practice setting boundaries, the more your body learns you're not in danger, you're in alignment. And once we start to get those positive consequences from setting boundaries, like peace, like esteem, like feeling more connected to ourself and our truth, we start to realize that when we grow and expand, it's not always the most comfortable thing. But remember, like sometimes our nervous system doesn't know the difference between the kind of fear that's like there's a lion in the room and it's going to kill me, so protect yourself, or I'm in a growth experience. It kind of tracks the same way in your nervous system. So all of these feelings that I'm listing, guess what? You have more power then. This is the illusion that these feelings are more powerful than us. It does mean that we are going to have to walk right up to some of these feelings and take our power back. So I've learned something in my own life, like sometimes you got to show up scared. There's a story that I can tell you guys about this. It was, I had an opportunity to have a television appearance, and one of my core wounds is around rejection. And so right before I was ready to go on this show, I decided that I didn't want to do it, that I was going to bomb, that I didn't know anything about boundaries setting, because that's what I went to talk about. If you can believe that, I actually know a lot, but that's what my fear was telling me. And that I was just going to not show up to the television appearance, ghost all of my clients, and go back to teaching and like live under a rock, because that felt like a lot safer. And then I was like, oh, right. Okay. But that is like the part of me that's trying to keep me safe by keeping me small. And I don't feel like it's aligned to live a small life. So I started to get curious with it. And so I told myself, okay, we don't have to go, but we just have to like get to the parking lot. And then once we get to the parking lot, we'll decide like if we want to go or not. So drive to the studio, get to the parking lot. And I'm like, you know what? Let's just like go sign in and get some information about like kind of the process of what we're getting into. And if you need to leave, like we can leave. Got in, signed in. Then they took me to the green room. And I'm sitting in the green room and I'm looking at this like beautiful studio. And there was a guest before me and he was very well dressed and just looked like someone that was smart and knew what they were doing. And I was like, I got to get out of here. There's no way. Like, I can't do this. And I was like, crap, but I'm here and I already signed in and they know I'm here. It's going to be so embarrassing. So I decided again to get curious with the fear, because the fear was the younger part of me that knew like, man, we're really exposing ourselves here. And there's like a huge risk that we're going to get judged and rejected. So I got curious with myself and I was like, what are you so afraid of? And the voice said back to me, your hand shakes when you get scared. And that's true. Sometimes my hand shakes when I speak, when I'm nervous. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be like a life coach coming on talking about like boundaries and confidence and all these things. And my hand is shaking. Like that just like definitely doesn't feel aligned. P.S. Again, just as a reminder, I am a human being as well as this title that I carry around. And I was activated. So I decided instead of bolting and keeping myself small and safe, that that lion that was in the room was a growth experience, and that I had shown up to a lot of growth experiences. So I said, okay, let me help you. And I looked, and it just so happened that in this particular television appearance, I was sitting at a table with the interviewer, and I went, okay, it's okay if your hand shakes. You can just put it under the desk or the table. And so they called me. I got up, I did my first segment, and sure as shit, my hand was shaking. And I put it under the table and I answered the questions. And then we broke for like a commercial. And all of a sudden, I like knew exactly what I was doing. I was like back in my body. I wasn't nervous anymore. I got through it. And I did it, and I got in my car, and I realized this new belief that challenged my old belief. And the new belief was like, oh my God, I can show up with my hand shaking, because my fear told me I couldn't do both. I couldn't be nervous and show up. I couldn't have my hand shake and do the interview. So what I learned was that like sometimes I need to integrate fear into the experience. So anytime I do a workshop, public speaking is not my jam. I know that you guys see me on here. I can somehow shift into this, but public speaking is not my jam. It activates me a lot. And so now when I get ready to do something that's a growth experience like that, I just go, okay, like what do I need for this? I need to prepare. I need my presentation. I need my computer. I need my cords. And oh, do I have my anxiety? Oh, okay, great. Because that is a part of my process. So I hope that story inspires you that like setting boundaries doesn't mean we're not in touch with our fear. It just means that we realize that the fear isn't telling us we're going to die emotionally. It's just a growth experience. So fear might be a part of your process of setting boundaries. Another feeling that comes up is insecurity. You might wonder, am I overreacting? Maybe I'm being too much. Maybe like I don't really need this. Maybe I'm not allowed. Like who am I to ask for that? Let me remind you, you're not too much. You're just finally honoring yourself. And that might feel unfamiliar, but it's not wrong. Anger and resentment, like I said earlier, I can't talk about boundaries ever without talking about anger. Anger is the alarm from your nervous system. Resentment is a spotlight showing you where you need to put more boundaries in your life. These are boundary messengers. They show up when your needs go unmet or your limits have been crossed. Anger is not bad. Now, let me be clear. There are two forms of anger. There is the positive form of anger and the negative form of anger. The negative form of anger is rage. Rage is not relational. Rage is compiled anger. And usually, if we have rage, we definitely need to do some digging around that because there's some healing that needs to be done. But the positive form of anger is that anger is the most motivating energy on the planet. If you get in touch in a healthy way with your anger, it becomes sacred. It will motivate you to leave that job that you've been stuck in or that relationship you've been stuck in. It will motivate you to take the risk to have a hard conversation. Resentment isn't petty. It's your nervous system asking, what needs to be shifted here? Like, how do I get back into alignment? Listen to them. They're trying to protect you. Vulnerability. Showing up in your truth, naming your needs, holding your limits, and establishing a line. All of it requires vulnerability. Vulnerability is not weakness. In fact, being vulnerable is probably one of the most courageous and brave things we can do. It's why I'm so passionate about teaching my system, because what is true is we shouldn't just be vulnerable with anyone and everyone. We need to have discernment around who we share our vulnerability with. But for most of us, we're not even vulnerable with ourselves. So taking care of ourselves, self-care, self-connection, self-truth, boundaries. They're all ways that we start to widen our window of tolerance of vulnerability with ourself. Because it's clarity, it's connection, and it's the most powerful kind of strength. And boundaries can be vulnerable. So it's something we need to learn how to manage. So now that we've talked about the hard part of boundaries, the emotional discomfort, the fear, the guilt, I want to talk to you about what's on the other side of that discomfort, because here's the truth. Boundaries don't just protect you, they transform you. They change how you relate to yourself. They change the kind of relationships you're available for. They create safety and clarity and connection that's sustainable and lasts. Let's talk about what becomes available when you start honoring your boundaries. 1, increased self-respect and self-worth. Every time you honor a boundary, you send yourself a powerful message that you matter. Not just when you're helpful, not just when you're easy to love, and not just when you're saying yes. You matter, period. And the more you act like that's true, the more you believe that it is. Self-esteem comes from doing esteemable actions. Being a doormat is not an esteemable action. Isolating is not an esteemable action. We don't feel good about ourselves when we do these things. Number 2, healthier and more authentic relationships. Boundaries are how you teach people how to be in relationship with you, not through control or manipulation, but through clarity. When you set clear expectations, limits, and needs, you create room for mutual respect and reciprocity rather than silent resentment. And real connection, it does require that kind of honesty. 3, protection from burnout and emotional overwhelm. When you are constantly saying yes to things that drain you, it's not just tiring, it's unsustainable. Boundaries are how you protect your nervous system. They're how you manage your energy. They're how you avoid overfunctioning and emotional burnout. Boundaries give you space to rest, breathe, and recover. Number 4, better communication. When you know what you're available for and what you're not, it's so much easier to communicate clearly. No more passive-aggressive hints. No more smiling while secretly fuming inside. No more calling up your bestie after an interaction with someone and ripping that person apart. Boundaries help you say what you mean and mean what you say with kindness and clarity. Number 5, more peace internally and externally. Boundaries quiet the chaos. In fact, I have a tattoo that means peace amidst the storm. I got it when I was younger before I had any of this. And I remember my mom saying, couldn't you have just put it on a bracelet? And the truth is I'm glad I didn't put it on a bracelet, because boundaries to me are the peace amidst the storm. It's the way that I can't control the weather of my environment, but I do have power to control the environment and the weather in my own biosphere, in my own environment. So boundaries quiet the chaos. You stop overcommitting. You stop people pleasing. You stop getting swept into dynamics that leave you drained, confused, or resentful. And what takes the place of all that noise? Peace. Peace in your body, more peace in your mind, and more peace in your relationships. Now, that doesn't mean you won't have conflict in your relationships. Conflict is a natural part of relationships. When handled in a safe and healthy way with boundaries, conflict actually breeds more intimacy. We feel safer with that person. But ultimately, boundaries, as much as they're destabilizing in the beginning and kind of overwhelming to start and put into practice, eventually lead to more peace in your life. Number 6, deep alignment with your values and your needs. Boundaries are how you live in integrity with who you really are. They're not about shutting people out. They're about choosing to stay connected to yourself, even in the presence of others. When you're in alignment, everything in your life starts to shift. Your relationships feel safer, your energy feels more spacious, and your choices feel more honest. Now, I want to bring Minka Kelly up because she was my first guest in episode 3. And there was like a beautiful moment in that podcast where we were kind of plugging some of the things that she's been doing work-wise. And she said, this kind of feels like, like here we are talking about all these deep things. And now I'm like plugging something. And at that time, she had a show coming out on Netflix in like a few weeks. It's called Ransom Canyon. Highly, highly recommend you check it out. But in that, when I said to her, oh yeah, but this isn't about like plugging. This is about like, this is evidence of alignment. Like you've worked so hard on yourself and so hard to get into alignment that now like your opportunities have shifted. There's more opportunities that are in alignment for you, because I know that the cast of this show and some of the other things that she's done have been very different from maybe some of the other work experiences she had. So I just want to show, because this is evidence, that as of today, her show on Netflix, Ransom Canyon, is the #1 show in the world on Netflix. Last week, it was the #1 show on Netflix. And it was the #3 show in the world. Today, #1 show in the world. So all of that work that she put into place to live an aligned life, like one of those was setting boundaries. And just if you haven't listened to it, that's a great episode to check out. It wasn't easy for her, just like it wasn't easy for me. The payoff is happening. So as hard as boundaries are to set, man, you don't know what's on the other side of them. Amazing things. So if no one ever told you this, let me be the first one who does. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have needs, and they are as important as the needs of others. You are allowed to stop abandoning yourself, especially in the name of keeping others comfortable. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to explain why you can't keep saying yes when your body is screaming no. You don't owe anyone access to you that compromises your peace. Boundaries are not just something you set with others. They're something you uphold with yourself. They're how you say, I'm on my own team now. And that changes everything. So here's your invitation. I want you just not to put boundaries in place, not to know exactly who you need to have boundaries with, although I'm sure your brain is already telling you that. The invitation is to start collecting data. From here on out, we are going to collect data in every relationship we're in, including the one with ourselves. I want you to start noticing how you feel after certain interactions. Pay attention to who or what is draining you and what is nourishing you. Notice when you say yes out of fear and when you say no from alignment. This is not about judgment. This is about curiosity and building awareness. And awareness is what leads to change. You are doing the work. I want you guys to know that even when we're getting curious, that is being in action. That is doing it differently. You are unlearning, relearning, and rising. And you don't have to do it perfectly. Let me tell you, I get paid to teach this. I don't do it perfectly. You just have to stay present and curious. You belong to you now. And I'm so proud of you for taking the first step and for listening to this whole podcast. My promise to you is that everything that feels overwhelming, I'm going to do an episode on. I'm not going to turn you out into your life and go, now have great boundaries and know how to communicate them and know how to manage your feelings. We're going to cover this in this podcast. And if anything feels destabilizing, if anything feels overwhelming, that is your invitation to seek out more support, to go find that Sherpa that has climbed that mountain before that can help guide you. Okay. We can't do this alone. This was never taught to us. Most of us never learned this in our home environments growing up. Okay. So if you need help, ask for it. Until then, take gentle care, go collect your data, and I'll see you next time because we're going to be talking about boundaries here for like a little bit. So if you're interested, subscribe, like, leave a comment, and let's keep going. See you next time. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for being here and for doing this work. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Come connect with me over on TikTok at Robin Breckenridge or Instagram at Coach with Robin, where I share even more insights, tools, and conversations around boundaries, self-trust, relational healing, and so much more. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and personal growth purposes only. The insights and tools I share are based on my experience as a life and relationship coach and are meant for general guidance. Each person's story is unique, and the nuances of individual experiences can't always be addressed in this format. What's shared here may not be applicable to every situation, especially those involving abuse, oppression, severe mental illness, or systematic harm. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please seek support from a qualified mental health professional or emergency resources. Thank you for listening and for showing up for yourself in this way. Take care, and I'll see you next time.